The radar blipped again, bright against the dim green of the carrier's radar screen. One lone aircraft was approaching at an unusual angle, small, almost imperceptible compared to the massive jets that normally patrolled these skies. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes squinted at the scope, tension coiling in his chest like a spring. "That's not in the flight plan," he muttered, leaning forward. The carrier deck, bustling with activity below, had eyes glued to the monitors, every movement amplified by the growing unease. The unidentified aircraft was closing fast. "Scramble the Raptors," Hayes barked, his voice cutting through the crackle of static and the hum of the operations room. Within seconds, 2 F-22 Raptor jets roared into the sky, screaming over the Atlantic waves. Their afterburners painted streaks of orange against the pale blue, slicing through clouds that had been building for hours. The pilots, Captain Jordan Mills and Lieutenant Evan Cruz, checked their instruments mechanically, yet every muscle tensed. Their mission: intercept and identify. But the speed and trajectory of this tiny aircraft were unusual, erratic almost, a flutter against the precision of military aviation. On board the small plane, a woman gripped the yoke with white-knuckled intensity. Her flight suit was smudged with grease, a stark contrast to the sleek uniforms of the F-22 pilots she was about to face. She wasn't a fighter pilot. She was a mechanic, a systems specialist who spent most days crawling under fuselages, repairing engines and checking hydraulics. But now here she was, alone in the cockpit of a single-engine plane, heading toward an aircraft carrier in open waters, with no backup, no escort. She inhaled sharply, eyes scanning every gauge, every blinking light. "Steady, just like we practiced," she whispered to herself, though no one had practiced for this. The first Raptor closed in, its massive wings casting a shadow over the tiny plane below. Captain Mills' voice came over the radio, clipped, professional, but laced with unmistakable tension. "Unidentified aircraft, identify yourself immediately. State intentions or you will be engaged." Her pulse quickened. The plane jolted slightly in the gusting wind and she had to fight to keep it level. I'm a maintenance pilot," she said finally, her voice surprisingly steady, though the words sounded small over the thrum of the jet engines. "Falcon 6, requesting clearance. I have a system malfunction but maintaining control." Static. The F-22s held formation above, engines roaring, trying to process what they were hearing. Falcon 6. That call sign. She had been a deck mechanic on the carrier for years, known among the crew as precise, fearless, and unusually gifted with machinery. But in the sky, flying alone, the recognition hit like a shockwave. "No, that's impossible," muttered Mills into his comms, eyes wide as he glanced at Cruz, who was equally frozen. On the carrier deck, radar operators began whispering. Her call sign was legendary, not for combat but for her uncanny ability to keep aircraft running under impossible circumstances. If Falcon 6 was airborne, something extraordinary was happening. And yet, the rules were clear. Any unidentified aircraft could be fired upon. The small plane banked slightly, testing her controls, feeling the airflow against the wings, listening to the subtle hum of the engine that could fail at any second. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and threatening, a storm she had not anticipated now becoming part of her challenge. She had never flown in a storm like this, not alone, not in a plane this small. Every instinct screamed to panic. She didn't. She couldn't. Lives depended on her composure. Her own life, yes, but also the hundreds of sailors below, and now, perhaps, the pilots above who had recognized her voice. The F-22s mirrored her every move, trying to anticipate her trajectory, their sensors locking onto the small plane. She could feel the pressure through the radio, the impatience, the suspicion, the potential for violence. One wrong move and the Raptor pilots could open fire. She remembered her training, the countless hours studying aircraft systems, her hands steady on the controls. "Keep her steady, keep her alive," she whispered to herself, repeating the mantra she had never thought would apply midair. Her mind flashed to the carrier deck, where she had spent years repairing planes, often under time pressure, sometimes in storms, sometimes with lives literally on the line. This was different. The stakes were higher, and yet oddly the skill set overlapped. She could read gauges, predict engine failure, sense the plane's limits. She could fly, not because she was trained for dogfights or carrier approaches, but because she understood the machine better than most pilots ever could. The first Raptor moved closer, wings cutting through the turbulence. "Identify yourself, Falcon 6. Repeat, identify yourself." Mills' voice was sharp, urgent. She swallowed, her throat dry, and replied, "I am Falcon 6. Engine failure. Requesting landing clearance on the carrier." Static again, then a pause that felt like an eternity. The F-22s hovered, not daring to fire, caught between protocol and recognition. Falcon 6. She wasn't just any pilot. She had earned a reputation for calm precision, for fixing aircraft others had given up on, for thinking clearly under pressure. But this was something else entirely. A sudden gust threw her plane into a slight roll, and she fought to correct it, fingers gripping the yoke, knuckles whitening. The ocean below churned, waves reflecting flashes of sunlight through the clouds. The carrier, massive and imposing, seemed impossibly far. And yet she focused on the details, the altimeter, the throttle, the subtle vibrations. Every movement had meaning. Every second mattered. Back in the F-22, Mills and Cruz exchanged glances. Recognition had frozen them for a moment, but now action was unavoidable. "She's coming in," Mills said, almost under his breath. The tension in his voice betrayed both fear and awe. They had intercepted countless aircraft, but never like this. Never someone so small in the sky, so unlikely, commanding such control. The radar screen blinked faster as Falcon 6 descended slightly, the carrier drawing closer. The storm clouds threatened and the wind began to bite. The tension was unbearable. Every eye on the deck, every sensor in the F-22s, every heart in the operations room pulsed in rhythm with hers. One mistake, one misjudged correction, one moment of hesitation, and the collision, the catastrophe, would be inevitable. And then, as if the world had slowed, Falcon 6 exhaled, steadied the plane, and whispered into the radio almost casually, "I'm coming in. Trust me." The F-22s held their positions, wings tense, engines screaming. The storm loomed, the ocean roared, and the carrier waited. And in that split second, every soul watching and flying knew that what happened next could either become a miracle or a disaster. Captain Jordan Mills felt the hairs on his neck rise as he hovered above the small aircraft. Falcon 6. The voice, calm yet commanding, had cut through the static and the roar of the F-22 engines. He couldn't believe it. Falcon 6, the mechanic, a name that had been whispered among pilots with respect, admiration, sometimes disbelief. She wasn't supposed to be airborne, certainly not approaching the carrier alone in this weather, yet here she was, maneuvering like a seasoned pilot. Lieutenant Evan Cruz stared at the radar screen, eyes narrowing. He had flown these intercepts hundreds of times, and yet nothing about this moment fit the script. Small aircraft, minimal power, approaching a carrier in turbulent skis, protocol said to engage if identification was delayed. But the voice, the clarity, the confidence, the call sign itself, it was enough to freeze both men mid-action. "It's her," Cruz muttered, almost under his breath, disbelief etched across his face. Falcon 6 requesting clearance. "I have a system malfunction but maintaining control." Her words repeated over the radio, each syllable precise. It was not a plea, not panic. It was command. She was asking permission, but she was also telling them she was in control, and that control alone defied logic. On the carrier deck below, radar operators exchanged stunned glances. Their eyes followed the trajectory, watching a tiny plane fight against turbulent gusts while maintaining an almost impossible stability. "Falcon 6, that can't be," whispered Ensign Laura Kim, her hand frozen over the console. Stories about Falcon 6 circulated through the carrier. She was brilliant at diagnostics, fearless during crises, and calm in ways that inspired everyone around her. But airborne, alone. That was unprecedented. As the F-22s closed in, Mills and Cruz instinctively adjusted formation, trying to shadow her without disrupting her approach. Her movements were precise but unconventional. Every bank, every throttle adjustment was calculated. She wasn't flying like a trained combat pilot. She was flying like someone who knew her machine inside and out. Someone who had spent countless hours understanding every gauge, every circuit, every subtle vibration. And right now, that intimate knowledge was keeping her alive. Mill's voice crackled over the comms again, strained, urgent, yet tinged with awe. "Falcon 6, do you copy? You need to identify yourself and declare intentions." "I am Falcon 6, she repeated, voice steady, almost eerily calm. "Requesting landing clearance on the carrier. Hydraulic failure on primary systems. Stabilizing manually." Cruz leaned closer to his HUD, analyzing her plane's movements. She's holding steady," he whispered. "And she's adapting to wind shear and turbulence in real time. That's impossible for someone with no flight hours in conditions like this." Below, the carrier's captain, Admiral Reynolds, leaned over the operations console, tension tight in his jaw. "You're telling me a deck mechanic is flying toward my carrier in a storm, and she's in control?" Radar Officer Kim swallowed hard, eyes glued to the screens. "Sir, yes, that's Falcon 6. She's managing the systems manually. I've never seen anything like this." Even the storm seemed to pause for a heartbeat. The low rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon, but her plane remained steady, a tiny orange dot slicing through clouds as if guided by instinct and sheer determination. She exhaled slowly, gripping the yoke, feeling the subtle feedback of the control surfaces under her hands. Every decision, every minor adjustment mattered. One slip, one misread instrument, and the ocean would claim her. Mill's hand hovered over the comms button. He wanted to issue orders. He wanted to assert authority. But that voice, the calm authority in it, held him at bay. He could almost hear the years of experience, the hundreds of planes she had touched and repaired, the countless emergencies she had resolved with steady hands. She had earned a kind of authority over machines that few pilots ever achieved in flight. "Falcon 6, maintain altitude and prepare for guidance from the carrier deck," Mills said finally, voice controlled but reverent. "We'll escort you." Her response was almost a whisper over the static. "Understood, maintaining course." Cruz exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders in a fraction of a second as he realized she wasn't panicking, not even slightly. And yet the F-22s continued to shadow her, vigilant. For all her skill, the environment was unforgiving. Storm clouds gathered, thick and dark, slashing across the sky. Gusts threatened to buffet the plane violently. A single miscalculation could trigger catastrophe. On the deck below, sailors braced for the impossible. Flight crews scurried, preparing safety nets and emergency vehicles, unsure if they were witnessing heroism or impending disaster. Cameras and radar were trained on her every movement, capturing what would likely be a historic moment. "That's Falcon 6, whispered one junior sailor to another. She's actually going to make it here alive." Falcon 6 focused on the instruments, reading each gauge like an open book. Hydraulic pressure at 40%. Fuel stable, altitude steady, engine response precise. She murmured calculations under her breath, small mental adjustments to account for turbulence and wind shear. In the cockpit, every vibration, every sound was data, feeding her decisions. She was calm, methodical, relentless. The F-22 pilots, once ready to engage, now exchanged stunned glances. She's keeping it steady," Mills admitted, voice barely audible. "I've never seen anyone manage that aircraft like this in these conditions. And she's not a trained pilot, she's a mechanic." Suddenly, the wind picked up, buffeting the small plane from one side to the other. Falcon 6 adjusted instinctively, rolling slightly, pushing throttle forward. The F-22s mirrored her moves, trying to avoid creating turbulence that could knock her off balance. The carrier loomed in the distance, but the final approach was perilous. Rain began to fall, blurring visibility, adding yet another layer of danger. Admiral Reynolds muttered under his breath, disbelief thick in his voice. "I need a status update now." "Sir," Kim responded, "Falcon 6 is still stable. She's actively compensating for wind and hydraulic issues manually. I don't know how, but she's alive." The F-22s closed in, forming a protective corridor around her small aircraft. Every pilot on board knew that a single misstep could turn this into disaster, but all agreed. She was extraordinary. Fear had become awe, tension had become respect, and hope began to flicker, fragile but bright. Falcon 6 inhaled deeply, feeling the rhythm of the plane beneath her hands. Her heart raced, but her mind was clear. The moment of recognition had passed, and now the challenge remained. Navigating a storm, commanding a machine she knew intimately, approaching a landing strip barely larger than the wingspan of her plane. She whispered to herself, almost as reassurance, "Steady, one decision at a time. You've done this before." The F-22s flanked her, engines screaming, slicing through the gray clouds. The carrier's lights glinted through the rain, a beacon and a target all at once. Every eye was on her. Every hand hovered over emergency controls. And in the cockpit, Falcon 6 focused, calm, precise, yet aware that the next moments would determine everything. One wrong move, and none of this would matter. Falcon 6 could feel the carrier beneath her like a distant heartbeat, every mile closing with deliberate precision. The storm was no longer a backdrop. It was a living, breathing adversary. Rain pelted the windshield, wind gusts rocked the fuselage, and lightning illuminated the horizon in jagged bursts, exposing the vast, gray expanse of the ocean. Yet in the cockpit, she was focused, calm, and precise. Each adjustment of the yoke, each press of the throttle, each subtle tilt of the rudder was calculated. She had spent years learning aircraft from the inside out, every system, every vibration, every failure point, and now that knowledge was keeping her alive. The F-22 Raptors flanked her on either side, engines roaring, their pilots straining to match her movements. Captain Mills had never seen anything like it. "She's maneuvering with intent," he murmured into the comms, disbelief thick in his voice. She's improvising and compensating for mechanical failure in real time. That's not supposed to be possible." Lieutenant Cruz stared out his cockpit, eyes wide. "It's like she's reading the air itself," he said. "Every gust, every shift in pressure, she anticipates it. Their training told them to expect hesitation, to see panic, but there was none. Falcon 6 moved through the sky like a seasoned predator, every motion precise, controlled, fearless. Below, the carrier crew held their breath. Flight deck lights blinked through the storm, reflecting off slick metal surfaces as sailors scrambled to prepare for her landing. "Safety nets in place, crash crews ready," shouted the deck officer, voice barely audible over the roar of wind and engines. Cameras captured every second, documenting the impossible. A mechanic, Falcon 6, was turning fear into precision before their eyes. The plane jolted suddenly, buffeted by a violent gust. She pressed the yoke forward, adjusting the flaps with expert precision. hold steady," she muttered under her breath, beads of sweat running down her temple. The hydraulic systems were failing. She could feel the resistance, the sluggish response. But she compensated instinctively, manually, feeling the machine as if it were an extension of her own body. Mills' voice crackled over the radio. "Falcon 6, your approach is unstable. Recommend immediate course adjustment or we may have to intervene." She met his warning with calm defiance. "I have control," she replied, steady. "Trust me." Trust. It was a single word, but it carried weight beyond measure. The F-22 pilots hesitated, suspended between protocol and instinct. Protocol demanded intervention for any unidentified malfunctioning aircraft. But instinct, the recognition of a veteran's skill, of someone who had faced impossible situations and prevailed, kept them hovering, engines screaming, wings slicing through wind and rain. Falcon 6 banked sharply, angling toward the carrier with a precision that made even the most seasoned pilots gape. The plane shuddered violently as wind tore at its wings. She pressed the throttle forward, resisting the urge to panic as she counteracted the forces attempting to throw her off course. Every muscle, every nerve, Every thought was consumed by the mechanics of flight. On the carrier, Admiral Reynolds' jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the radar screens. "She's a miracle," he whispered to no one in particular. Sailors exchanged astonished looks, some muttering prayers under their breaths. Cameras captured the tiny aircraft slicing through turbulence, a testament to skill, courage, and sheer audacity. The F-22s flanked her, maintaining a delicate formation, their engines creating a protective wind corridor. Mills adjusted constantly, the magnitude of the task dawning on him. "I've flown combat missions in worse weather," he admitted into the comms, voice low, "but never with this level of control from a non-pilot." The storm intensified, clouds roiling like angry sea monsters. Rain turned to sheets, visibility dropping to mere meters. Falcon 6 relied not on sight alone but on her instruments, on the feel of the aircraft, on instinct honed from years of repairing machines that could kill if handled wrong. Hydraulic pressure dropped further. She could feel the change in resistance. Another misstep now would send the plane careening into the water. Her hands moved with fluid precision, adjusting flaps, throttles, rudder pedals, every command deliberate. The F-22s mirrored her movements, careful not to disrupt her delicate balance. Below, the carrier deck shone through flashes of lightning, a beacon of hope and danger all at once. Mill's voice was tight. "Falcon 6, your altitude is dropping faster than expected. Prepare for course correction." "I've got it," she replied, calm, resolute. "Adjusting now." And she did. She shifted weight subtly, nudged the controls, managed throttle and flaps, counteracting turbulence as though the storm were a puzzle she had been born to solve. The Raptor pilots watched, slack-jawed, as she executed maneuvers that even the most experienced carrier pilots would approach with caution. Crew's eyes wide muttered, "She's improvising mid-flight, calculating wind vectors, engine limitations, deck movement, and she's keeping it stable. That's insane." Falcon 6's pulse raced, but her mind remained clear. The carrier deck grew larger with every second, waves crashing alongside, rain blurring the horizon. She knew the final approach would be perilous. One wrong tilt, one misjudged gust, one failed system, and disaster was inevitable. But she could do this. She had no choice. And somehow, against all odds, she trusted herself completely. A sudden jolt hit, the plane yawing violently. She countered instinctively, flipping switches, adjusting trim, feeling the plane respond beneath her fingertips. The F-22s flanked her tighter now, ready to intervene if she faltered. But she didn't. She leveled out, altitude stabilized, control regained. "Falcon 6, Mill's voice came over the comms again, tinged with awe. "How are you still stable?" "I know my plane," she said simply, voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "It's responding to me. Just watch." Every eye in the sky, every hand on the carrier, every nerve in the F-22 cockpits was locked on her. The storm roared, lightning splitting the sky, rain lashing against metal, engines screaming. And yet in that chaos, Falcon 6 remained a calm, commanding presence, bending the aircraft to her will, proving that knowledge, courage, and instinct could triumph over even the fiercest elements. But the storm wasn't done. Ahead, dark clouds coalesced into a wall, gusts threatening to pitch her into the sea, hydraulic systems warning of imminent failure. Falcon 6 swallowed, her hands steady on the yoke. She was about to enter the most dangerous phase yet, the landing approach, and the carrier deck seemed impossibly small in the storm's fury. She whispered under her breath, almost to herself, "One maneuver at a time, steady, trust your hands, trust the plane." The F-22s held position, watching, ready, holding their collective breath. Every second stretched, tension coiling like a spring. One wrong move and the miracle of Falcon 6 could end in disaster. And yet, somehow, in the heart of the storm, against all odds, she was still in control. The question now wasn't whether she could survive the storm. The question was whether she could land safely on a moving carrier, while the ocean roared and the sky threatened to tear her from the air. And in that moment, as lightning flashed and waves pounded the carrier, every soul watching knew. The real test was only beginning. The carrier loomed ahead, a colossal metal giant cutting through the turbulent waves, lights blinking through sheets of rain like stars struggling against a storm. Falcon 6's small aircraft hovered at the edge of chaos, engines screaming, wings quivering against gusts that threatened to throw her into the ocean. She could see the flight deck crew, tiny specks moving like ants across a vast, illuminated platform, bracing against the wind. Every detail mattered now. One wrong calculation, one hesitation, one misjudged gust, and she would not survive. Captain Mills' voice crackled over the radio, sharp, commanding, and tinged with urgency. "Falcon 6, this is the carrier. We cannot risk collision or loss. Divert to the secondary approach or we may have to engage." She swallowed hard, her hands steady on the yoke. Divert to a secondary approach. She had analyzed the situation, calculated her glide paths, and decided her chance of landing there without losing control was slim. She had to trust herself and her instincts. Her voice came over the radio, calm, steady, precise. "I'm maintaining current course. 20 minutes to align for landing. Trust me." Silence filled the channel for a heartbeat before Mills replied, barely above a whisper, You can't be serious." "Yes," she answered, voice unwavering. "I am Falcon 6. I know my plane, I know my systems. I will make it, just hold position." Even the F-22 pilots were stunned. Captain Mills leaned forward, eyes wide. She was asking them to trust her, alone in a storm with failing hydraulics while piloting a small single-engine aircraft against impossible odds. And yet something in her voice, the calm authority, the unshakable precision, demanded trust. They did nothing. They held position. Engines screamed. Wings trembled. Every pilot in the sky knew that the next 20 minutes could change history. Below, the deck crew braced for the impossible. Sailors shouted into the wind, coordinating crash nets and emergency vehicles. Radar officers tracked her every move, holding their breath. She's really doing it," muttered Ensign Laura Kim, disbelief etched into her expression. Cameras captured her small orange plane cutting through the storm, a beacon of determination against the gray, raging ocean. Falcon 6 exhaled slowly, calculating the wind vectors, monitoring engine response, feeling the plane's subtle feedback. Hydraulic pressure was dropping steadily. Her primary controls were less responsive, but she had practiced manual overrides countless times. Her hands, skilled and steady, danced across the yoke and switches, adjusting every minor input with precision. Every decision mattered, every movement was critical. The F-22s flanked her closely, protective yet restrained, forming a corridor of controlled air to buffer the turbulence. Mills' voice came again, a mix of tension and awe. "You're insane, but somehow you're stable." "I'm not insane," she replied, voice calm, measured. "I'm Falcon 6, and I've handled worse than this on the ground. This is just different." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the storm in stark, violent bursts. Rain lashed against the cockpit, blurring visibility. Gusts of wind threw the plane into rolling turbulence, and she fought to maintain control. Her eyes flicked to the altimeter, then to the attitude indicator, then to the carrier lights, calculating minute angles of approach, every second, every fraction of a degree. "Falcon 6, you are entering a critical flight envelope," Mills warned. "Any further instability and we cannot guarantee safety. Recommend immediate corrective maneuvers." She shook her head ever so slightly, adjusting trim, nudging rudder pedals, counteracting turbulence and feeding constant inputs to the failing hydraulics. "I have control," she said, voice unwavering. "I can manage this. I have to manage this." The storm roared louder, the ocean's waves splashing higher against the carrier, a reminder of the peril below. Deck crews braced, ropes and nets taut, safety vehicles ready to respond instantly. Cameras captured the impossible scene, an untrained pilot, a single-engine plane, approaching a carrier amid nature's fury. Social media and live feeds might one day immortalize this moment, but for now, the tension was unbearable. Falcon 6 adjusted flaps slightly, feeling the plane respond. The wings quivered, but she held them steady. Another gust threatened to flip her, to push her off alignment, and she countered instinctively. Each second stretched endlessly, time folding in on itself. She was aware of every heartbeat, every breath, every vibration. Failure was not an option. "Falcon 6, what's your fuel status?" Mills asked, voice sharp. "Enough," she replied, glancing at the gauges. "Enough to land or ditch safely if necessary, but I won't ditch. I will land." Even the F-22 pilots exchanged glances. They had been trained to intercept, to command, to enforce protocol. Now they were witnessing a mechanic outperform seasoned pilots, making decisions with clarity, precision, and courage. The level of trust she commanded, not through rank but through sheer capability, was unprecedented. A sudden wave of turbulence pushed the plane down sharply. Falcon 6 countered immediately, twisting the yoke, adjusting the throttle, leaning into the storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the carrier deck, showing the final path she needed to follow. She whispered under her breath, almost as reassurance, "Steady, steady, you've done this before." The carrier's radar screens lit up with data. Operators called out wind shifts, deck motion, and her exact coordinates. Every piece of information was crucial. The deck itself pitched and rolled with the waves, creating a moving target that only magnified the difficulty. Every sailor held their breath. Every hand hovered over emergency controls, waiting for the first sign of disaster. Mills' voice cut across the comms again, tense. "Falcon 6, your course is optimal, but you must confirm landing sequence immediately. Adjust for wind shear." She nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Confirmed," she replied. "Adjusting final vector now. Hold position and monitor. I can do this." For a brief moment the storm seemed to pause, a suspended heartbeat between chaos and control. Falcon 6's hands moved with a rhythm born of years of experience, of repair, of observation. She had fixed aircraft engines under worse conditions, smoke, fire, and malfunction. But now the stakes were higher, the environment less forgiving. One wrong move and the plane, and possibly the crew, would be lost. And yet, amidst the rain, wind, and thunder, she felt an extraordinary clarity. Fear existed, yes, but it was harnessed, sharpened, focused. Each adjustment was precise, each calculation deliberate. The impossible, inch by inch, was becoming possible. The F-22 pilots watched, protective, awestruck, holding their position as Falcon 6 carved her path through the storm. Below, sailors tightened ropes, adjusted nets, and braced against the chaos of nature. The carrier itself seemed to hold its breath. Falcon 6 exhaled, adjusting the yoke, countering a sudden lurch. "Just a little further," she whispered. "Just a little further." The storm had yet to release its final fury. The carrier deck pitched violently, waves slammed against it, and the wind threatened to twist her plane like paper. Yet she was still flying, still calculating, still alive. One decision, one maneuver, 1 second at a time, and she would prove that knowledge, skill, and courage could overcome even the most impossible odds. But the real challenge was approaching. The landing deck was small, the waves high, the storm unrelenting, and her hydraulics failing. Every eye in the sky, every soul on the deck, every heartbeat aboard the F-22s knew the next moments would be the ultimate test. Falcon 6 steadied her grip, adjusted flaps, leveled her wings, and whispered almost to herself, "Time to land." And with that, the storm seemed to tighten around her like a vice, the carrier looming ever closer, the final decision looming larger than any fear she had ever faced. The carrier deck glimmered through the sheets of rain like a distant, moving island, its lights flickering against the storm's fury. Falcon 6 adjusted her throttle, feeling the plane respond like an extension of her body. The hydraulic systems groaned, resisting commands, but she countered instinctively, a dance of fingers and feet on the yoke and rudder pedals. Every minor adjustment could be the difference between survival and catastrophe. She could feel the turbulence twisting the fuselage, the gusts threatening to flip her, yet her hands remained steady, her mind razor-sharp. "Falcon 6, you're entering the final approach corridor," Captain Mills' voice crackled over the radio, tense but controlled. "Wind shear increasing at deck level. Confirm gear deployment." "Gear down," she confirmed, lowering the wheels manually. Sparks of resistance jolted her arms, but the plane obeyed. Every inch of descent required focus, calculation, and nerve. Lightning split the sky ahead, illuminating the rolling deck like a war zone. Waves slammed against the hull, each crash sending the carrier surging up and down, a living, breathing platform of metal and chaos. The F-22s flanked her, creating a protective corridor of air, engines screaming to hold their relative positions. Mills adjusted constantly, mirroring her maneuvers to avoid buffeting her plane, while crews monitored turbulence vectors. "She's doing it. She's actually going to make it," crews muttered, disbelief mixing with awe. "I've flown this route dozens of times and no one, not even trained carrier pilots, would attempt it in this weather." Below, the deck crew braced against the wind and rain, ropes in hand, nets taut, emergency vehicles primed. Every eye was fixed on the tiny orange plane slicing through the storm, each sailor aware that the slightest miscalculation could spell disaster. Cameras rolled, capturing every heartbeat of history in motion. Falcon 6 leaned forward, scanning her instruments, cross-checking altitude, speed, and attitude. Hydraulic pressure was critically low. She could feel the flaps responding sluggishly, the rudder barely effective. She whispered to herself, a mantra learned over years of working on failing aircraft. "Steady. One control input at a time. Trust the plane." A sudden gust pitched her slightly left. She countered, nudging the yoke and adjusting throttle, feeling the plane respond reluctantly. Rain lashed against the cockpit, reducing visibility to mere meters, yet she navigated as if the storm were a puzzle she had solved before. The carrier grew larger, a metal beacon, but the deck's rolling motion made alignment nearly impossible. "Falcon 6, altitude dropping too fast," Mills shouted. "Adjust or we cannot guarantee a safe landing." "I see it," she replied, voice calm. "Compensating now." She pressed the yoke forward subtly, increased throttle, and leveled the wings. Her body tensed with every adjustment, muscles straining, nerves screaming, yet her mind was a map of control, precision, and calculation. The F-22s mirrored her movements, engines roaring, providing just enough buffer against the storm's fury. Lightning split the sky, revealing the deck's exact orientation. Waves slammed against the hull, pitching the carrier violently. Falcon 6's plane dipped, threatened by turbulence, yet she corrected instantly. Each correction was a gamble, each movement a life-or-death decision. Sweat ran down her temple, but her hands never wavered. She had never been more alive, more acutely aware of every vibration, every resistance, every heartbeat. Deck crews shouted into the wind, coordinating net placement and crash vehicles. "She's lining up. Keep those nets ready. God help us." The adrenaline on the deck matched that in the sky, each sailor aware that every second counted. Falcon 6 leaned further forward, monitoring glide path, speed, and the plane's subtle reactions. She whispered almost to herself, "Steady, steady, you've got this." The storm fought against her, a relentless adversary, but she remained unwavering. Mills' voice crackled again, tinged with awe. "Her control is phenomenal. It's like she's reading the storm itself." Cruz, eyes glued to his HUD, muttered, "I've never seen anyone at all fly like this under these conditions." The final stretch approached. The carrier deck loomed beneath her like a target painted in flashing lights, waves lashing against its edges. Hydraulic pressure dropped further, flaps were sluggish, rudder barely responsive. She had seconds to adjust alignment perfectly, to ensure wheels met metal and not ocean, to counter wind gusts threatening to pitch her into disaster. A sudden lurch pushed the plane sideways. Falcon 6 reacted instantly, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttle, counteracting the gust with minute-precise movements. Sparks flew as metal resisted under the stress of turbulence. She exhaled slowly, mentally counting every meter to touchdown. The storm seemed to tighten, the ocean roaring, the carrier rolling violently beneath her. "Falcon 6, you are on the edge," Mills shouted. One wrong move and his voice trailed off, replaced by the roar of engines and wind. "I know," she said, voice calm, resolute. "I've got it." She angled the plane perfectly, aligning with the deck lights. Every second was stretched taut with tension. She felt the wings resist, the yoke fight back, the plane straining against gravity and failing systems. And yet she pressed forward, one final, calculated adjustment. The F-22s hovered protectively, engines screaming, wings trembling against the storm. Below, sailors gripped ropes and prepared crash nets, hearts hammering, every nerve alert. The carrier itself pitched beneath the storm, a moving target that had to be tamed. Falcon 6's hands moved like trained dancers across the yoke and controls. Each input, each minor adjustment was deliberate, measured, life-saving. The wheels lowered, touching the deck with a jolt, sending sparks flying as the plane shuddered. She fought to maintain control, resisting the storm's chaotic forces, the failing hydraulics, the violent pitch of the carrier. The F-22s flanked her as she taxied along the wet deck, every second a battle against wind, rain, and mechanical failure. Crew members ran alongside, guiding, securing, watching in stunned silence. Cameras captured the impossible, an untrained pilot, a mechanic, landing on a storm-lashed carrier with precision that defied logic. Falcon 6 exhaled, every muscle trembling, heart racing, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had made it to the deck, but the final challenge, bringing the plane to a complete safe stop, still loomed. The storm raged, the deck rolled, and the slightest miscalculation could undo everything she had achieved. And yet, amid the chaos, she smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the deck, hands steady on the controls, knowing that she had turned desperation into precision, fear into mastery. The world seemed to hold its breath, the storm pausing in acknowledgement, before the next second brought the ultimate test. Could Falcon 6 stop the plane safely, before nature and the failing systems decided otherwise? The plane's wheels kissed the deck with a jolt that rattled every bone in Falcon 6's body. Rain sluiced across the windshield, making the carrier lights streak into elongated lines, turning the landing deck into a slick, moving target. Hydraulic systems groaned and protested as she eased the throttle back, fighting to maintain control. Every inch of her small aircraft pressed against the laws of physics, and every fraction of a second mattered. One slip, one misjudged gust, one tremor from the rolling carrier, and the plane could flip or slide into the ocean. The F-22s hovered nearby, engines screaming, wings trembling against the storm. Captain Mills and Lieutenant Cruz could only watch, breath held, ready to intervene if the impossible faltered. But Falcon 6 had proven time and again that she was no ordinary pilot. She was in perfect synchronization with the machine beneath her hands, reading its feedback, predicting its reactions, anticipating the treacherous wind gusts as if she were part of the storm itself. On the deck, the crew held their breath. Nets were stretched taut, crash vehicles in position, ropes clutched like lifelines. Every sailor's eyes were locked on the tiny plane, adrenaline coursing in rhythm with the aircraft's heartbeat. Hold steady," shouted the safety officer, voice almost lost in the roar of rain and wind. Cameras recorded every drop of rain, every shiver of metal, every second of suspended terror. Falcon 6 adjusted her flaps incrementally, feeling the wings resist under failing hydraulics. The rudder responded sluggishly, and she nudged it subtly, counteracting a lateral gust that tried to push her into the deck's edge. Sparks erupted where metal kissed metal. The carrier's pitch and roll made alignment nearly impossible, but she held her focus, eyes scanning lights, instruments, and horizons simultaneously. "Falcon 6, the approach vector is critical," Mills' voice cut through static. "Any misalignment," and his warning ended in a roar of engines and wind. "I'm aware," she replied, voice calm but steady. adjusting for deck roll, stabilizing now. The plane shuddered violently as a wave slammed into the carrier, pitching the deck beneath her. She pressed the yoke forward slightly, throttle back, flaps down, rudder adjusted minutely, and the aircraft responded. Inch by inch, she edged closer to a safe stop. Each adjustment was a gamble, but one she executed with the precision of a surgeon. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the deck like a theater stage. Crew members sprinted to guide the plane, ropes in hand, eyes wide with terror and awe. Every sailor knew that the next few seconds would define the outcome. The storm's fury was unrelenting. Rain pelted her windshield, wind gusts ripped across the flight deck, and the deck itself rolled with the ocean, a relentless adversary. "Falcon 6, your hydraulic pressure is dropping rapidly," Cruz shouted over the comms. "You have seconds to act." She exhaled, hands gripping the yoke, feet dancing over pedals, brain calculating dozens of variables simultaneously. "I know," compensating manually. "Hold steady," she said, her voice almost serene despite the chaos. The plane touched down fully, wheels rolling over the slick deck, sparks flying where friction met metal. She fought to keep the nose aligned, the tail from fishtailing. The F-22s hovered protectively, engines roaring to buffer the wind and turbulence. Mill's hands tightened on his controls, watching every move, ready to act if disaster struck. Deck crew shouted, guiding the plane, coordinating emergency teams. Every sailor held their breath, muscles tensed, hearts hammering. Falcon 6 eased the throttle back further, feeling the rudder resist. The plane slid slightly, but she nudged it with expert precision. Sparks flew, tires squealed, but she maintained control. Inch by inch, the aircraft decelerated. Rain lashed harder, the storm screaming in opposition, but Falcon 6's focus never wavered. She visualized the landing strip in her mind, calculated the plane's momentum, countered the gusts, and aligned perfectly with the deck. Sweat streamed down her face, soaked by rain, yet her hands remained steady. One more adjustment and the plane would be secure. A sudden, violent gust threatened to push the aircraft off course. Falcon 6 reacted instantly, nudging the yoke, adjusting throttle and leaning into the wind. The F-22s mirrored her movements, engines screaming, forming a corridor of protective air. Sparks erupted again as metal protested the friction of tires against the wet deck. Crew members shouted commands, guiding the plane toward its final resting point. Her pulse hammered in her ears, every nerve alive. The moment stretched into eternity. Then finally the plane slowed, nose aligned, wheels gripping metal instead of slipping toward the ocean. Falcon 6 exhaled, heart racing, adrenaline coursing through every vein, but control never left her hands. She had done it. Against impossible odds, through the storm with failing hydraulics, she had landed. The deck erupted into cheers. Crew members sprinted forward, clapping ropes, securing the plane, embracing each other in disbelief and relief. The F-22 pilots hovered, engines still screaming, watching in awe. Mills finally spoke, voice tight with emotion. She did it. Falcon 6, she actually did it. Cruz's eyes were wide with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this in my life," he said, voice trembling. "Not in training, not in combat, nothing. She's extraordinary." Falcon 6 exhaled slowly, hands trembling slightly but mind steady. She released the yoke and looked around the cockpit, drenched, heart still racing, lungs burning. The plane had survived, she had survived, and the storm was still screaming around them. But for the first time in what felt like hours, she allowed herself a moment of relief. Admiral Reynolds stepped onto the deck, rain soaking his uniform, eyes wide. "Falcon 6, I don't know what to say," he shouted over the wind. You've done something no one thought possible." Falcon 6 looked at him, voice calm but exhausted. "I just did what I had to," she said simply. "The plane and I, we made it together." Sailors and officers alike crowded the deck, clapping, cheering, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others whispering prayers of gratitude. Cameras captured the historic moment. An untrained pilot, a mechanic, landing on a storm-lashed carrier with skill and courage that defied logic. The F-22 pilots finally landed nearby, engines winding down. Mills exited his cockpit, running toward her, shaking his head in awe. "I don't know how you did that," he said, voice still trembling. "But thank you. You saved yourself and maybe all of us too." Falcon 6 allowed herself a faint smile, glancing around at the storm, the deck, the crew, and the small plane that had carried her through the impossible. "It wasn't just me," she said softly. "It was the plane, the crew, everyone. We all did this together." The storm continued to rage, but its fury had been met, challenged, and conquered. Every eye on the deck, every soul in the sky, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. And yet, even as adrenaline faded and cheers erupted, the question lingered in everyone's mind. How had she, a mechanic with no formal flight training, pulled off the impossible? For now, though, there was celebration, relief, and awe. Falcon 6 had landed. She was alive, and she had done the unthinkable. But even as the applause continued, a small part of her mind focused on the aircraft's systems, the storm's fury, and the reality that this was only the beginning. One wrong move earlier, and the story would have ended differently. One slight miscalculation, one gust, and history would have remembered her differently. She looked out over the deck, rain still hammering, waves crashing, and whispered to herself, almost as a vow, "We survived today, but I will never underestimate the sky again." The rain still fell in relentless sheets, but on the carrier deck the storm of adrenaline had been replaced by a different kind of energy, a mixture of disbelief, awe, and cautious celebration. Falcon 6 sat in the cockpit, wet and trembling, but alive, gripping the controls even though the engines were powered down. Around her, sailors and officers scurried, securing the aircraft, ensuring every strap, every wheel, every system was stabilized. Yet no one could take their eyes off her. She had done the impossible, and everyone knew it. Captain Mills finally descended from his F-22, uniform soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes wide with disbelief. He reached her side and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know how you did that," he said, voice tight with emotion. "But you've just rewritten every manual we've ever had about landing under these conditions. You saved yourself and possibly everyone else on this deck." Falcon 6 exhaled slowly, a faint smile breaking across her face despite exhaustion. "I didn't save anyone," she said quietly. "I just did what I had to do." Lieutenant Cruz approached, shaking his head in amazement. "Do you have any idea what we just witnessed?" he asked, voice incredulous. "You were calm, precise, like you were born to fly that plane. And you landed it in a storm that would have grounded even the most experienced carrier pilots. You're extraordinary." The Admiral, Admiral Reynolds, finally made his way to the deck, soaked through but visibly moved. "Falcon 6, he began, voice booming over the roar of the storm. "I've seen a lot in my career. Pilots who have flown in combat, mechanics who have repaired aircraft under fire, but I have never seen anything like this. You have not only survived the impossible but have shown bravery, skill, and presence of mind that deserves recognition at the highest level." Sailors gathered around, some clapping, some murmuring prayers of gratitude, all staring in awe at the small figure in the cockpit. Cameras captured every second, every droplet of rain, every spark of emotion, creating a visual record of heroism that would circulate through naval history. Mills shook his head again, stepping back to watch the scene unfold. "I've flown with some of the best pilots in the world," he admitted quietly to Cruz. "But she's in a league of her own. There's something about the way she thinks, anticipates, controls. She doesn't just fly, she commands the aircraft, like it's an extension of her own body." Falcon 6 finally climbed out of the cockpit, drenched and trembling, every movement deliberate and controlled. Crew members helped her steady herself as she walked along the deck. The storm was still fierce, waves crashing, wind screaming, but the tension had shifted from fear to awe. She could hear whispers. "Did you see that? She's a legend." Admiral Reynolds gestured for silence. "All of you listen," he said, voice rising above the storm. Today we witnessed something extraordinary. Falcon 6, a mechanic with no formal flight training, faced the storm, failing hydraulics and a landing that no one believed possible, and she succeeded. She represents the courage, skill, and ingenuity of every person on this ship. Let her achievement be recognized. The sailors erupted into cheers. Even the F-22 pilots standing nearby removed their helmets, clapping, shaking their heads in disbelief. Mills approached Falcon 6, handing her a towel and offering a smile. "You just earned the respect of every pilot in this fleet," he said. "Not just for today, but for every time anyone underestimates what's possible when skill, courage, and calm meet." Falcon 6 shook her head, still processing the gravity of what had happened. "I just trusted the plane and myself," she said. "That's all." Cruz, standing off to the side, muttered under his breath, "No, this is more than that. This is courage, intelligence, and precision at a level I've never seen. We just witnessed history." News soon began to spread through the carrier via internal communications. Reports described her as a hero, a symbol of ingenuity and bravery. Even senior officers who had doubted her airborne abilities were forced to acknowledge that the impossible had been achieved. The storm outside continued to rage, but on the deck there was celebration, relief, and a sense of unity born from witnessing a miracle. Falcon 6 stood for a moment, looking at the plane she had flown, feeling a mixture of pride and exhaustion. Every surface of the aircraft bore marks of the storm, sparks, and minor scratches, but it had survived. She had survived. The F-22 pilots approached her once again, expressions a mixture of reverence and astonishment. "Falcon 6, Mills said, voice hushed now, "you've changed the way we think about flying. Not just the mechanics, but the human element, the calm, the precision, the courage. I've never seen anything like it." Cruz nodded, adding, "You've earned a place in aviation history, whether you wanted it or not. And trust me, every pilot, every mechanic, every crew member on this carrier will remember this day forever." Falcon 6 allowed herself a small, tired smile. "I don't know about history," she said softly. "I just did what needed to be done, and we made it." The Admiral placed a hand on her shoulder again, rain dripping from his uniform. "And that, Falcon 6, is exactly why history will remember you. Today, you turned fear into precision, panic into calm, and chaos into control. You've earned not only our respect but our deepest admiration." Even as the storm continued to lash against the carrier, the crew and pilots felt a sense of awe that was unshakable. Falcon 6 had faced the impossible and prevailed. Her skill, courage, and presence of mind had redefined what was possible in the air, and she had done it with nothing more than instinct, intelligence, and sheer determination. As the adrenaline faded, the emotional weight of the day began to settle in. Sailors laughed, hugged, and shook their heads, still incredulous at what had occurred. The F-22 pilots, once ready to intercept and possibly engage her, now stood humbled, recognizing a peer in a class all her own. Falcon 6 finally allowed herself to breathe fully, looking around at the faces of those she had inspired, protected, and awed. There was respect, gratitude, and a shared understanding that they had all witnessed something extraordinary. The storm, relentless outside, had become a testament to her courage, skill, and unshakable calm. And in that moment, as the carrier pitched and rolled beneath them and rain hammered down in sheets, one thing was clear to everyone present. Falcon 6 had not only survived the impossible, she had become a legend. But even as admiration poured in and cameras captured every soaked, heroic detail, a small whisper of tension lingered in the back of her mind. What had pushed the storm to its fury? What systems had failed? And what unseen challenges still awaited her, beyond the deck, beyond the storm, and beyond the limits of human expectation? For now, though, she was alive, victorious, and recognized by everyone around her. But deep down, Falcon 6 knew that the skis held more challenges, and the world had just seen the beginning of what she was capable of. The storm had begun to abate, though rain still lashed against the carrier. droplets glinting under the deck lights like scattered diamonds. The wind, while fierce, no longer threatened to rip the aircraft from the sky. Falcon 6 sat in the cockpit of her small, battle-worn plane, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her hands trembled slightly, adrenaline fatting into a deep, hollow fatigue that reminded her of the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. Around her, the crew moved with a newfound energy, a mixture of reverence, disbelief, and joy, every sailor acutely aware that they had witnessed history. Admiral Reynolds approached, soaked but radiant, every inch the picture of authority humbled by her courage. "Falcon 6, he began, voice steady yet thick with emotion. "Today you didn't just land an aircraft under impossible conditions. You reminded all of us what human skill, courage, and precision can accomplish. The Navy, the fleet, and history itself will remember this day. You've earned a commendation that few ever will." Falcon 6 allowed herself a faint smile, wiping rain from her eyes. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said softly, voice tired but unwavering. "I did it because it had to be done. The plane needed me. The crew needed me, that's all." Captain Mills stepped forward, removing his helmet, shaking his head in awe. "All due respect, Falcon 6, he said, voice quiet enough that only she could hear. "You've rewritten everything we know about crisis management and improvisation. I've flown combat missions in worse weather with more training, and I never felt that level of clarity. You, mechanic, pilot, legend, did what we thought impossible. You deserve the highest recognition the Navy can offer." Lieutenant Cruz, still dripping wet, nodded vigorously. "I've never seen anything like it. Not in simulations, not in live exercises, not in combat. You've set a new standard for everyone who steps into an aircraft. Pilots, mechanics, crew will be telling this story for decades." Falcon 6 rose from the cockpit, muscles aching, soaked to the bone. Her eyes swept across the deck. The carrier had survived, her plane had survived, the crew had survived, and they had all seen the impossible become reality. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "We all survived," she said softly. "Together." The Admiral nodded, smiling for the first time in hours. "And together, you've shown what courage and mastery look like. But this isn't just about survival. It's about legacy. Today, you've inspired every single person on this ship. You've proven that skill, determination, and presence of mind can defy even the most impossible odds." News of the miracle spread like wildfire across the fleet. Internal communications buzzed with awe, admiration, and disbelief. Pilots, mechanics, and crew members everywhere were watching footage of her landing, the small orange aircraft slicing through the storm like a beacon of determination. Analysts pored over every second, every movement, every adjustment she made, studying it as a case study in calm, calculated courage under extreme conditions. The F-22 pilots, once ready to intercept, now walked beside her with respect bordering on reverence. Mills shook his head again. "Falcon 6, he said, voice hushed. "I have spent years flying and intercepting aircraft. Today, I've learned more about human skill and instinct in 10 minutes than in a lifetime. You've not only earned our respect, you've earned our admiration." Even Cruz, who had spoken sparingly until now, added, "I'll never look at a cockpit the same way again. You've turned fear into focus, chaos into precision, and danger into triumph. And we were there to witness it." Falcon 6 allowed herself a deep exhale. For hours, she had been operating on adrenaline and instinct, navigating the impossible. Now reality was sinking in, the weight of the storm, the danger, the awestruck faces, the recognition, and the incredible knowledge that she had done something extraordinary. Admiral Reynolds clasped her shoulder firmly. "We will make sure the Navy, the Department of Defense, and the country recognize what you've done today. But beyond medals or commendations, you've given us a reminder of something far greater, that human skill and courage can triumph where technology, odds, and fear might fail. Today, you are a living legend." Falcon 6's eyes swept across the deck again, resting on the small plane she had mastered. Every scratch, every dent, every mark from the storm told a story of survival, precision, and determination. She knew that this plane, this crew, this moment would forever remain etched in her memory. But even more than that, she realized that her story, of a mechanic turned hero, would inspire countless others who might doubt themselves or the impossible. Sailors continued to gather, snapping photos, recording videos, and clapping. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered prayers of gratitude. She allowed herself a faint smile, acknowledging them, yet already thinking ahead. Today was about survival and heroism, but the skis were infinite, and there would always be new challenges. Mills leaned closer, speaking quietly. "You know," he said, "I've flown with some of the best pilots in the world, but you've redefined what it means to be in the cockpit. People will study this for years." Falcon 6 nodded slowly. "I only hope they study it and understand the heart of it," she said. "Skill isn't just training or rank or medals, it's focus. It's calm. It's respect for the aircraft, the crew, and the mission. Anyone can learn that if they try." The sun began to break through the storm clouds, rays cutting through the lingering gray, illuminating the deck, the plane, and the crew like a spotlight on history. Cameras flashed, sailors cheered, and even the F-22 pilots looked on with solemn reverence. The impossible had been achieved. The miracle had been executed. Admiral Reynolds raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "Let it be known," he said, voice firm, commanding, and full of awe, "that today Falcon 6 has shown what courage, skill, and determination can achieve. She has inspired us all, and her name will be remembered wherever courage is honored. Today, she is a legend." Falcon 6 finally allowed herself to fully release the tension in her body. Her legs were trembling, her muscles sore, her face streaked with rain and sweat, but she was alive, victorious, and recognized. She had faced the impossible, landed against the storm, navigated failing hydraulics, and earned the respect of the most seasoned pilots and crew. Yet even as the cheers echoed across the deck, a small, reflective thought lingered in her mind. This was not the end. The skis were vast, storms would come, aircraft would fail, and challenges would continue. But she now knew with unshakable certainty that no obstacle, no storm, no mechanical failure could break her resolve. And in that moment, as the carrier sailed through calmer waters, the storm behind them and history ahead, Falcon 6 stepped forward, drenched but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. She had survived the impossible. She had landed against all odds, and she had become a legend whose story would echo through time. The world, watching, would never forget the day a mechanic became a hero, a woman who faced the storm, defied expectation, and proved that courage, skill, and determination could make the impossible possible.